Hello, and welcome to my citizen science project. For my project, I chose to build a compost bed. Composting is a unique way of recycling organic waste into healthy soil and fertilizer to use for a garden by decomposing scraps that you would usually just throw away. Composting is important because it helps keep municipal solid waste such as food scraps and yard clippings out of landfills. Together, food scraps and yard clippings account for 28% of the solid waste that Americans throw out every year. It is important to keep food scraps out of landfills because after a while, without the proper conditions to decompose like oxygen, they will release methane, which is a greenhouse gas which contributes to climate change. Composting will help decrease the amount of methane gas released into the atmosphere while also returning nutrients like nitrogen and carbon into their original state. Composting works by having the right balance between brown components and green components. But brown components are things that are carbon rich and typically dry. They include things like torn paper, cardboard, paper towels, dry leaves, twigs, sticks, crushed eggshells, and many other things. Green components are rich in nitrogen and are typically wet. Materials in this category can include manure, but make sure it's from a herbivore and not a carnivore. Food or vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, grass clippings, and even weeds. But make sure the weeds don't have seeds so that they won't grow in your compost bed. A good balance is typically 1 green part to every 2 brown parts. In order to encourage my family to add to my compost bed and make sure they knew which things were acceptable, I printed out a list of both brown and green components and posted it in my kitchen above the trash can to make sure they thought about what they were throwing away and how it could be saved from going to a landfill. Once everything is in my compost bed, it takes time to break down and decompose. I built my compost bed by taking a storage bin and drilling holes into all 6 sides of it, including the lid and bottom. The holes in the bottom allow for decomposers like worms to come into the bin from the earth. The holes allow for ventilation and for air to get into the bin, which is needed for the decomposition, and it also speeds up the process. After filling my bin with dry leaves and twigs, I added some food scraps that I have been collecting, like banana peels and eggshells. I then moved my bin down to my backyard where the bin could be in contact with the ground to allow decomposers into the bin. In the future, I would just use chicken wire instead of a bin. The direct contact with the earth would speed up the process by allowing more decomposers to have access to the compost. I would also leave the top open. Although this would take more time to decompose, it is easier to add things and stir when necessary to allow more air to get to the bottom. The bin concept also trapped too much water with heavy rains, forcing me to have to drain it after every rain. If I did choose to continue the bin concept, I would need to add more holes to allow for drainage. In the end, I had to dig to the bottom to obtain the soil that had been decomposed the most into fine particles. Since it usually takes more than a year for a whole bin to decompose, I had to sift out the fine particles from the larger pieces that were still being broken down. I then put the nice, fresh, nutrient-filled soil into small pots and added seeds. I planted a variety of plants such as sunflowers, poppy seeds, baby watermelons, zinnias, and even cherry tomatoes. As you can see from the pictures, I had to replant the zinnias from the styrofoam cup I first had them in into a larger pot because they grew so fast and the roots needed room to grow. Every plant takes a different amount of time to germinate, and that is why some plants have not grown to the surface of the soil yet. But the sunflower seeds are definitely fast growers. These pictures were taken only 3 days after they were originally planted. Eventually, all of these plants will need to be replanted, but until they grow taller, I am keeping them inside because you never know what this Georgia weather is going to do, and I want to keep them safe. That's it for my composting adventure. Can't wait to watch these plants grow. Thanks for watching!